Hello everyone, my name is Sawhney. I'm an undergraduate student at Grinnell College, and I'm a senior. My partner for this project was Sawhney. He is a sophomore at Western Illinois University, and we've been working on this research for 4 years. So, as we all know, obesity is a growing epidemic. In the United States especially, it is of great concern because of the 22 industrialized countries, the United States has the highest obesity rankings, with 1/3 of our population obese and 2/3 suffering from being overweight. Economically, it is also a burden. There are 38% higher healthcare costs for those who are obese compared to those of normal weight. Researchers argue that genetic defects can only explain a small portion of the obesity epidemic, forcing us to look for behavioral explanations on obesity. The genetic predisposition of an individual can only influence the metabolic efficiency, but cannot determine the actual metabolism of the body, which is impacted by environmental factors such as diet and exercise. Studies have associated that the rise in obesity in the U.S. can be related to an increase in calories from snacking and larger portion sizes. Another stream of literature has focused on dietary fat, especially from meat, which for a long time has been considered the primary dietary determinant of obesity. Warnings from the American Heart Association regarding risks from saturated fat has led Americans to switch to eating more lean meat. Over the last 2 decades, the reported percentage of dietary energy derived from fat has fallen, but interestingly, our obesity rates are still rising. Besides obesity, another trend over the years has been the increasing consumption of meat. Over the last 50 years, we see that our consumption of boneless meat has increased by almost 100 pounds per year. And while the daily recommended consumption of meat is 3 to 4 ounces a day, most Americans consume 9.6 ounces of meat per day. So these two rising trends, increasing obesity and increasing meat consumption, suggest that there may be a correlation between the two. However, there's a lack of consistent results. Some studies have observed that the prevalence of overweight and obesity is higher among meat eaters as compared to vegetarians. However, there are other studies that have suggested that there is no relationship. Besides the lack of agreement, the existing studies do not offer a conceptual model to explain why meat consumption increases the susceptibility to obesity. In the US, there's a fear and confusion of protein deficiency. There's a dominant belief that high meat diet is essential for preventing protein deficiency. As a result, Americans are consuming high levels of meat and proteins compared to the recommended amounts. And 70% of the protein in an average American diet is from meat. A few studies have examined the metabolism of protein and concluded that high protein diets help maintain healthy body weight. There are a few flaws in these experimental designs. The studies were not randomized, and hence the findings cannot be generalized. They assume that all people in the experiment have a similar metabolism, so there were no controls in maintained for the different body types. They do not control for taste for the food items. They did not control for the source of protein, if it was animal or plant, and these studies were restricted to short-term impact of protein consumption and cannot comment on the long-term impact of protein consumption on weight. A comprehensive study of the literature led Anderson and Moore to conclude that protein source as a factor affecting the short-term feeding responses of humans has received little investigation, and the results are mixed. Therefore, the perception that a high protein and high meat diet help in maintaining healthy body weight may be market-driven because of the scientific evidence that does not confirm this view. More research is required to examine the relationship between protein consumption coming from different sources and maintaining healthy body weight over the long term. And this is what we were interested in studying. So to test this, we had two broad questions that are examined. One, metabolically, does high meat consumption provide us with a mismatched source of energy that puts us at a risk at a higher rate of obesity? And two, behaviorally, does high meat consumption lead to irregular eating habits that put us at a higher risk of obesity? This study will identify the intervening variables to help us explain why high meat consumption makes an individual more vulnerable to overweight and obesity. So studies have found that plant protein contain a cellulose wall that makes it harder to break down and takes us longer to digest. Dietary fiber in plant proteins is resistant to digestion by human digestive enzymes. Therefore, it increases the digestion time. So compared to animal protein, we would expect that plant protein would take longer to digest. Animal protein also requires a higher acidic environment for digestion, and that is found in the human stomach. Therefore, logically, it would make sense that animal protein would digest faster as compared to plant protein. And these above results have been proven in lab experiments of rats. So based off of this literature, we hypothesized that faster energy is released from the digestion of animal protein as compared to plant protein in the human digestive tract. To test this out, we did an in vitro model where we examined the digestibility of plant and animal protein in the human digestive system. So we had a positive control test using BSA, bovine serum albumin, which had no protein. We had a negative control test using lab-grade dextrose, the BSA has all protein, and the lab-grade dextrose has no protein. And then the entire experiment was conducted on 8 food items, 4 of which were plant proteins and 4 of which were animal proteins. The proper laboratory controls were maintained, and at the end of the presentation, if anyone has any questions about the experiment, I can go through with you. But what we found was, so our results were taken using a spectrophotometer, where light absorbance results indicate greater protein digestion. Statistical analysis was conducted and t-tests were taken. And what we found was that at the control, which was just the animal protein, we see that there are high light absorbance values, indicating that there was not protein digestion. If we look at the pH 2 plus pepsin environment, which replicates the stomach, we see very low light absorbance results, which indicate protein was digested. Looking at the next environment, pH 5.4 plus pepsin, we see that there's a drastic increase in the light absorbance results, suggesting that there was a decrease in the amount of protein that was digested. And then finally, in the pH 8 plus trypsin environment, which represents the duodenum, we see that there is, again, an increase in light absorbance results, indicating not much protein digestion occurred. And if we compare the pH 8 plus trypsin and the control, we see that the values are very similar, which also further support that not much digestion occurred. And this was true for animal protein. For plant protein, we see again at the control, which was just the protein, that there was very high light absorbance results, indicating that not much protein digestion occurred. In the stomach environment, pH 2 plus pepsin, we see again a drop in the light absorbance, indicating protein digestion. However, now what we see is that as we increase the pH to go to pH 5.4 plus pepsin, that there is an increase in light absorbance results, but it's not as drastic as we saw for the animal protein. And again, similarly for pH 8 plus trypsin, again, we do see an increase in the light absorbance results, but it's not as drastic. And if we compare those results to the control, we see that there is a large difference, whereas compared to the animal protein that we just saw, the results were very similar. So these lab results show us that most of the animal protein was getting digested in the human stomach, releasing energy faster, while digestion of the plant protein was taking place at an even rate in the stomach and duodenum, releasing energy slower. So this kind of made us start thinking of a few other possible questions. Does faster release of energy from the high meat diet provide a mismatched source of energy if you have a sedentary lifestyle? And if the animal protein is digesting faster, does it make people consume high meat diets hungrier faster? And would that lead them to overeat or snack frequently? So the calorie that we take in or use depends on our metabolism rate, which is different for different people depending on their gender and age. Someone with a high physical activity will have a faster metabolism and be using the energy faster. But for a sedentary lifestyle, we need small dosage of energy, which are provided in a diet that digests that slowly, which in our experiment was through the plant-based diet. The average American lifestyle has become more sedentary due to the developments in modern technology. So to stay healthy, we have to see what adjustments have Americans made for these dietary patterns to fit their lifestyle. And we see that we haven't made many adjustments at all. In fact, we are consuming more meat since the last 5 decades. High meat diets tend to digest faster, thus releasing higher amounts of energy in shorter periods of time. Plant-based foods having a higher fiber and lower energy density take longer to eat and digest, and this was confirmed in our laboratory experiment. The calories that aren't used in our body get stored into fat. When we need energy, we don't use that fat for energy. We take the sugar in our blood. As the sugar levels drop in our blood, the body sends signals of hunger, and that typically results in the individual to snack. Over a period of time, these individuals may develop a learned behavior, coaxing them to eat bigger meals to prolong the hunger pangs, thus consuming greater calories and thus overeating. This happens because body fat, in order to release energy for body fat, it's only done when we're overdriving our situation. So that would mean moving from a moderate level of activity to a very physical level of activity. And Bray calls this an energy imbalance. So based off of this, we hypothesized that people consuming higher meat proportions in their diet are more likely to snack and more likely to overeat. Our hunger is controlled by the hypothalamus in our brain, which then sends signals to tissues in our GI tract. So due to feedback loops, that means that any problem in our GI tract, such as irregular or irritable bowel syndrome, could impact and irregularly impact our daily food intake. One of the primary reasons for irregular bowel movement or irritable bowel syndrome is due to low fiber in our diets. Research has found that the average American is consuming almost half of the prescribed amount of fiber in our diet right now because our consumption is primarily of meat, which does not have any fiber. Americans who are predominantly meat eaters are at a higher risk of constipation compared to vegetarians. It can be argued that by not having bowel movements in the mornings, they may wake up not feeling as hungry, which would result in them either having a light breakfast or not having breakfast at all. Taking that argument further into lunch, again, we can see that they may not feel hungry for lunch or have a very light lunch. Having not eaten throughout the day, they are more driven by external cues of hunger, seeing or smelling food, and they may lose control on their hunger and start snacking throughout the day. As a result, they may be snacking on more energy-dense foods, and we see that dinner will most likely be their main meal, where they consume most of their calories. On the other hand, an individual with regular bowel movements will be regulated more by their biological rhythms of eating a full breakfast. They will regularly eat their lunch, which will be their main meal, and that is driven mostly by the catabolic processes in our life, in our stomach. And each individual will demonstrate more control on their eating habits and will be guided by internal cues of hunger. So they will be eating snacks at scheduled times. So based off of this, we hypothesized that individuals who have a high meat consumption are more likely to skip breakfast, skip lunch, snack based off of external cues of hunger, snack on energy-dense and processed foods, and make dinner their larger meal. For vegetarians, they are most likely to regularly eat their breakfast, regularly eat lunch, snack at scheduled times, snack on non-energy dense foods, and have lunch as their larger meal. Consumption of larger and irregular meals has been associated to greater risks of obesity, and obesity has been linked with skipping breakfast and higher frequency in eating in the form of snacking. Obese people also consume a greater proportion of their energy intake in the latter half of the day as compared with lean individuals. And Irregular consumption of food can lead to adaptive hyperlipogenesis, which is mainly that the body's not sure when it will be getting its next meal since you're so irregular that it starts storing the food in the form of fat. As we all know, physical activity helps develop muscle tissues, and so those who are more metabolically active will have which are more metabolically apt compared to fat, thus raising the metabolic level of the body that helps us lose weight. Decreased physical activity is associated with the development in modern technology and have eased and reduced the physical workforce. Physical activity has also been found to negatively be correlated with overweight and obesity in children, while watching TV and playing video games has positively been correlated. So we hypothesize that people with a higher meat consumption are more likely to be overweight, and people who are physically inactive are more likely to be overweight. To test hypotheses 2 through 7, we designed a questionnaire to gather information on people's eating habits and behaviors. It was administered in 4 towns in 2 states, and we had received an 86% response rate with 489 usable data points. What we found was that people with a higher meat consumption had a higher tendency to snack frequently and had a higher tendency to overeat, both of which are likely causes of obesity. We also found that people with a higher meat consumption reported skipping their breakfast, having a higher tendency to skip their lunch, had a higher tendency to snack based off of external cues of hunger. They had a higher tendency to snack on energy-dense foods, and dinner was their larger meal. People who were vegetarian reported that they had a higher tendency to regularly eat their breakfast and their lunch, had a regular tendency on snacking at regular times, and they consumed energy or foods that were higher in vegetables, fruits, and they had simple snacks, and lunch was their bigger meal. We also found that the body mass index was positively impacted by higher meat consumption and negatively impacted by higher recreational physical exercise and physical labor in the workforce. So what we can conclude from this is that metabolically, higher meat diets digest faster. So that would provide a rapid release of energy, which if not used will be converted to fat, increasing our risks of obesity. Also, that makes us hungrier faster, leading us to want to snack frequently and overeat, which would also increase our risks for obesity. Behaviorally, high meat diets are adversely changing our eating habits, making them irregular, which increases our risk of obesity. And higher meat consumption and lack of exercise were found to be significantly associated with the increase in obesity. So, what we can take away from this is that our study supports the notion that eating a balanced diet is important to maintain a healthy weight. Both vegetarian and non-vegetarian diets can be healthy if they are balanced and based off of our personal day-to-day activities. A sedentary lifestyle that most Americans support nowadays would require us changing from a 70% based animal diet to a 70% plant-based diet. Eating habits and tastes are also formed at a young age, so we would recommend educating children about their eating habits and their lifestyles. Our research contributes to the theory developed by identifying the intervening variables to help clarify why high proportion of meat consumption leads to obesity, a question that was not answered in earlier observational studies. By identifying the intervening variables, this paper advances causality between meat consumption and obesity, which would not be claimed from earlier observational studies. These results of our study may also be useful for epigenetic scholars. An important question for them is exploring how high meat consumption may be changing the genetic predispositions of an individual towards obesity. Our research also provides the missing link to another research stream that examines the relationship between obesity and the chronic bowel problems, but it is tentative about the direction of causality. Our research supports the notion that a high meat diet causes irregular bowel movement, IBS and irregularity, which causes obesity, thus providing the directional clarity between IBS and obesity. Like all studies, there were a few limitations. The field study was only collected from 4 Midwestern towns, so they cannot be generalized to the entire population of the United States. Also, the questionnaire was all self-reported, so due to social desirability, it's most likely that people may have underreported their weights, but that in fact strengthens our results. The impact of sugar and fatty foods were not included in our study, and the use of cross-sectional data, we use cross-sectional data, therefore causal inferences cannot be implied. In the future, we would like to collect field study data points from other parts of the US to increase the generalizability and conduct controlled group experiments to examine the impact of higher animal protein on obesity. I would like to thank those who helped us in the study, Dr. Mashmi Day, who kind of provided the inspiration for the study, Lisa Wen and Jack Wong, who helped in the lab experimentation, and Dr. Rajiv and Sabitha Sawhney for their help in the literature search and their support. Thank you.